Welcome to A Story a Day. Please subscribe channel. Thank you. The locked door. The morning I discovered the locks had been changed. The air inside my chest felt heavier than the rusted tools, lining the workshop walls, or at least the walls I could no longer enter. I stood there, key in hand, turning it once, then twice, listening to the hollow click of metal that no longer belonged to me. The lock was new, shiny, final. That workshop had been my refuge since I was 16. It was where my father taught me how to sand rough edges until something broken could shine again. After he passed, the workshop became the last place where his voice still felt alive. Every shelf, every oil-stained rag, every half-finished project carried his fingerprints. And now I was shut out. My mother stood behind the kitchen window, watching. She didn't come outside. She didn't say my name. The curtain twitched, then fell back into place. I already knew why. Ever since I told them I planned to start my own restoration business, using the workshop as a base, things had changed. My stepfather called it a fantasy. My mother said I was being irresponsible, that I should sell the equipment and grow up. To them, the workshop wasn't a legacy. It was clutter, something to be controlled. I knocked once, hard. No answer. I pressed my forehead against the cold wood of the door, breathing in the familiar scent of oil and dust leaking through the cracks. My hands trembled, not from anger, but from the realization that this wasn't about space or keys. It was about power, about reminding me that in this house, I still had to ask permission to exist. When my mother finally stepped outside, her arms were crossed so tightly it looked painful. "You can't just lock me out," I said quietly. "It's our property," she replied. "And until you figure out a real plan for your life, the workshop is off limits." A real plan. As if the nights I stayed up sketching designs, the customers I'd already spoken to, the small but hopeful steps I'd taken meant nothing. I wanted to argue. I wanted to shout. But something inside me went still. Calm. Clear. I nodded once, slipped the useless key into my pocket, and walked away. They thought the locks would stop me. They didn't realize the workshop had already taught me everything I needed to know about building, something from nothing, and about walking away from what no longer wanted me. 2 days later, I would make a decision that would change the balance of power in our family forever. But for now, all I had was the sound of that new lock clicking shut behind me, and the quiet promise I made to myself that I would never beg for access to my own worth again. 2 days of silence. The first day after the locks were changed, no one spoke to me. My mother moved through the house like I was furniture, something solid enough to avoid, invisible enough to ignore. Plates were set for 2 instead of 3. Conversations stopped when I entered the room. Even the floorboards seemed quieter beneath my feet, as if the house itself had taken sides. I spent most of that day in my room, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment I'd ever spent in the workshop. The smell of sawdust, the low hum of the old drill, my father's hands guiding mine when I was too young to hold a tool steady. He used to say, "They can take things from you, son, but they can't take what you know." I didn't realize then how much I would need that lesson. By the second day, the silence grew heavier. Not awkward, intentional, punishing. My stepfather left early for work without a word. My mother cleaned the kitchen aggressively, slamming cabinets like they had personally offended her. I made coffee and left it untouched, the bitterness rising with the steam. Around noon, I finally heard them talking. "She'll come around," my stepfather said, his voice low but sharp. "They always do." "I just want her to be realistic," my mother replied. "That workshop is holding her back." Holding me back. I stood frozen in the hallway, my chest tight. They weren't just locking a door, they were rewriting my story, turning my dreams into childish stubbornness, turning my father's legacy into a liability. That afternoon, I left the house and walked until my legs burned. I passed storefronts with for lease signs, old garages with cracked concrete floors, places most people wouldn't look twice at. But I did. I saw potential. I saw possibility. I sat on a curb and pulled out my phone, scrolling through the photos I'd taken over the years, before and after shots of furniture I'd restored, cabinets I'd rebuilt, a dining table that someone once called beyond saving. My hand shook, not with doubt, but with clarity. That's when I made the call. "Hey," I said when my uncle picked up, "do you still have that old storage unit?" There was a pause. "Yeah." "Why?" "Because I need space," I replied. "And I'm done asking for permission." That night, I packed quietly. Clothes, tools I'd kept in my room. Not much, just what mattered. As I zipped the bag, I felt something unexpected rise in my chest. Relief. They thought the locks would break me. That 2 days of silence would send me crawling back, apologizing for wanting more. Instead, those 2 days gave me something they never had, certainty. And by the time the sun rose on the third morning, I wasn't planning how to get the workshop back. I was planning how to build my own. The first brick. The storage unit smelled like dust and old cardboard. The kind of place where forgotten things went to wait out their last days. The metal door screeched as my uncle rolled it up, sunlight spilling across a cracked concrete floor. To anyone else, it was a dead end. To me, it was a beginning. "You sure about this?" My uncle asked, leaning against his truck. His voice carried concern, not doubt. "I've never been more sure," I said. He nodded once and handed me the spare key. No lectures. No conditions. Just trust. It felt strange how powerful that was after years of being questioned. The first night, I worked until my arms ached. I cleaned, swept, organized. I set my tools along the wall like soldiers ready for duty. The workbench was an old folding table, uneven and scarred, but it held steady. When I plugged in the lamp and the warm yellow light flickered on, my throat tightened. It wasn't my father's workshop, but it was mine. I slept on the floor that night, jacket folded under my head. The hum of passing cars outside. Every sound felt unfamiliar, but none of them felt threatening. For the first time in days, my mind was quiet. By morning, I had my first job. A woman from a local cafe responded to a message I'd sent weeks earlier, back when I still thought I needed permission to succeed. She had an old counter stool, wobbly and cracked, but sentimental. Her father had built it. She didn't want new. She wanted restored. As I worked, muscle memory took over. Sanding, measuring, reinforcing joints. Each movement felt like a conversation with my past. Each improvement a small rebellion against everything I'd been told I couldn't do. When the stool stood upright again, solid, balanced, alive, I stepped back and laughed. Out loud. Alone. The sound echoed off the metal walls, startling me with its freedom. That evening, my phone buzzed. "Mom, where are you?" I stared at the screen. 2 days ago. I would have rushed to explain. Apologized. Promised to be reasonable. Now, my reply was simple. Me, working. Minutes passed. "Mom, we need to talk." I looked at my hands, dusty, scraped, capable. I thought of the new lock on the old door, of the silence they thought would control me. Me, not tonight. I delivered the stool the next day. The woman ran her hand over the smooth wood, eyes shining. "You saved it," she whispered. "No," I said softly. "I just listened to what it needed." She paid me more than I asked. As I drove back to the storage unit, the sun low in the sky, it hit me. This wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about proving myself right. The workshop they locked me out of taught me how to build. Being locked out taught me why I needed to. The door they didn't expect. Word spread faster than I expected. A repaired chair here. A refinished table there. People talked about the care I took, about how I didn't rush, about how I treated old, damaged things like they mattered. By the end of the week, the storage unit no longer felt empty. It felt alive. Projects lined the walls. The air smelled like wood and possibility. That was when my mother showed up. I was sanding the edge of a cabinet door when I saw her shadow stretch across the concrete. She stood just outside the open unit, handbag clutched tightly, eyes scanning the space like she was trying to make sense of a language she'd never bothered to learn. "This is where you've been?" she asked. I didn't stop working right away. I finished the stroke, set the sander down, and wiped my hands on a rag before turning to face her. Yes. She looked around again, at the tools, the half-finished pieces, the handwritten order list taped to the wall. This is temporary, she said, more statement than question. I met her gaze. No, it's a start. Her jaw tightened. You didn't have to leave like that. You could have just talked to us. I felt the old anger rise, sharp and familiar, but it didn't stay. In its place was something steadier. I tried, I replied. You changed the locks. Silence stretched between us, thicker than the dust in the air. We were trying to protect you, she finally said. From disappointment. I gestured around the unit. Do I look disappointed? She didn't answer. For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker across her face. Not guilt, something closer to fear. Fear that she had been wrong. Fear that control had slipped through her fingers the moment. She thought. She was tightening her grip. I just wanted you to be safe, she said quietly. And I wanted to be myself, I replied. She nodded slowly, as if accepting something she couldn't undo. When she turned to leave, she paused. The workshop at home, she said. It's still there. I knew what she was offering. I don't need it back, I said gently. You needed the lock more than I did. That night, I closed the metal door of my unit and locked it, not to keep myself out, but to protect what I'd built. The sound was different. Clean. Earned. They thought the door they locked would stop me. They never imagined I'd build a better one, somewhere else. What couldn't be locked? A month later, I signed the lease. It wasn't much, just a narrow garage on the edge of town with peeling paint and a crooked sign above the door. But when I held the keys in my hand, they felt heavier than any set I'd ever owned. Not because of metal or weight, but because no one could take them from me. I moved out of the storage unit that same weekend. Friends helped me load the tools. My uncle showed up early with coffee and said nothing, which somehow meant everything. When the last workbench was bolted into place and the lights flickered on, I stood in the center of the garage and let the silence settle. This silence wasn't punishment. It was peace. Business picked up. Slowly, then all at once. People didn't just bring me broken furniture, they brought stories. A table where a family once argued and laughed. A rocking chair that survived 3 generations. Objects people refused to give up on. Because giving up would mean admitting something precious was truly gone. I understood that feeling better than most. One afternoon, my mother called. I drove past your shop today, she said. The sign looks nice. Thank you, I replied. Another pause. Different from before. Softer. I didn't realize how much it mattered to you, she admitted. I thought of the locked workshop door, the silence, the nights on a concrete floor, all the things that broke before they built me back up. I know, I said. We are still learning how to speak to each other. Some doors, once closed, never open the same way again. And that's okay. Not everything broken is meant to be restored. On the anniversary of my father's birthday, I finished a project I'd been saving for myself, a workbench. Solid oak, smooth edges, built to last decades. I carved a small mark underneath, where only I would see it. His initials, beside mine. That night, I locked up and stood outside, looking at the shop lights glowing softly in the dark. They changed the locks to remind me of my place. Instead, they showed me something far more important. You can lose access to a room. You can lose approval. You can even lose family for a while. But you can't lock out purpose. You can't restrict resilience. And you can't take away what someone builds with their own hands. I turned the key, smiled to myself, and walked away, knowing that everything I needed had never been behind that old door at all. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe a story a day.